Just 2 weeks, ladies and gentlemen, until we're finally lights out in 2020. Today, I want to take a step backwards, and over the next couple of weeks, you will see plenty of 2020 content, season previews, team previews, and of course an Austrian Grand Prix complete revamp of the weekend preview system like I did last year. I'm actually so excited to release that video. But today, I want to look back at 2019. My goodness, does that feel like such a long time ago. We had that final race in the first weekend of December last year. But I think because it was so long ago, quite a few of us, including myself, have forgotten how quite a bit of the season played out. And I think today will be a hell of a lot of fun to refresh ourselves where Formula 1 left off before this crisis we are currently finding ourselves in the world. So if you're new around here, feel free to subscribe. I hope you enjoy today's video, but let's crack on with our season recap of Formula 1 2019. I honestly remember thinking, coming out of winter testing in 2019, this could be Ferrari's season. And with hindsight, yes, I was wrong, and a lot of the Formula 1 world were wrong, but I think once we hit Bahrain, I vividly remember thinking, after that qualifying session, Charles Leclerc's first pole position, goodness me, what a year we could be in for. But before the season started, my goodness, were there stories galore in that winter testing period. Of course, it was Ferrari that appeared to be on top, Mercedes a close second, and Red Bull not too far behind in P3. That fight for the midfield, no one had a clue who was going to be at the front. McLaren looked strong. Haas were hoping to build on their incredible 5th place finish overall in 2018, and Renault signed Daniel Ricciardo to join their team. What kind of a push could they have in that midfield fight? We had Williams not even showing up to the beginning of testing, and Paddy Lowe being put on gardening leave. That was all looking to crumble straight away. We also saw plenty of driver transfers away from that midfield. Charles Leclerc moved to Ferrari, his first season at the big boys. Kimi Raikkonen, who he took his place of, moved to Alfa Romeo Sauber, where he made his debut all the way back in 2001. We also had Pierre Gasly taking the place of Ricciardo at Red Bull, and we had 4 rookies join the ranks of Formula 1. George Russell at Williams, Lando Norris at McLaren, Alexander Albon at Toro Rosso, and Antonio Giovinazzi stepping into his first full season of Formula 1 alongside Kimi Raikkonen at Alfa Romeo. We also had the incredible story of Robert Kubica making his return to Formula 1, and though we probably won't cover his season much in this video, what an incredible journey it was to return to motor racing and to see a full season of Kubica back in Formula 1. But out of winter testing, it was so unclear what the pecking order would be, and we headed to Melbourne, the first race of the year, and it looked to be a bit of a snooze fest from the off. The Grand Prix wasn't the most exciting. A Mercedes 1-2 in qualifying all looked to be going into the hands of Lewis Hamilton. However, a charge from Verstappen, and with the 2 Ferraris scrapping over team orders, it was Bottas who made the most of it, winning the opening round of the season despite not winning at all in 2019. To those who are concerned, thank you. The words of Bottas after the Grand Prix. Round 2, it continued. Mercedes 1-2 once again, but it was not as straightforward as the first race of the season in Australia. Leclerc, his first ever pole position in Formula 1, Vettel locking out the front row for Ferrari. And in the opening stages of the Grand Prix, though Vettel took the lead on the opening lap, Leclerc was right there, hounding him down, took the lead back from Sebastian, and it was only thanks to engine issues late on in the race, it was Hamilton who was able to gain that position, with Vettel doing the first Spinella of the season with a fight with the 6-time world champion. Bottas also was able to get past the stricken Ferrari of Leclerc, but with a late safety car, with both Renaults retiring from the Grand Prix with just a few laps to go, Leclerc held on for his first ever podium in Formula 1. We were also seeing an emergence of McLaren. Lando Norris had got through to Q3 in his first ever running in Formula 1 in Australia, and Bahrain got his best points finish of the season all the way up in P6. Carlos Sainz, also in the Grand Prix, was fighting with Max Verstappen just outside of those podium finishes. However, contact with the Red Bull driver sent Sainz all the way to the back of the field and would continue his non-scoring streak carried over from Melbourne. Along with Sainz, we also saw Daniel Ricciardo and Romain Grosjean both retire from both opening rounds of the season. Daniel Ricciardo famously losing his front wing before turn 1 in Australia and engine failures late on in Bahrain. Romain Grosjean also famously losing his tyres once again in Melbourne in what could have been an incredible 5th place finish for the Frenchman. In Bahrain, Lance Stroll hitting the back of his car, retiring from the Grand Prix. We then headed to China. A similar story to what we'd seen so far this season at the front of a pack. 1-2 again for Mercedes, 3 in a row. Ridiculous. It was the first time on the podium for Sebastian Vettel in the season, and Alexander Albon from pit lane to points, what a drive that was, and really put him on the map in Formula 1. Azerbaijan, a bit of a quieter affair this time round. 2017 and 18 were bangers of Grand Prix. 2019 not so much. But with pole position once again, it was Valtteri Bottas who took the Grand Prix victory. Again, it was a 1-2 for Mercedes, now making it 4 in a row, one off the record of the best start to a season for a team. And Sebastian Vettel made it back-to-back podiums for Ferrari. Carlos Sainz also began his ridiculously good point scoring streak in that midfield with a 7th place finish, his first for McLaren. We then headed to Spain. Spain isn't a circuit best known for overtaking. Likewise with Monaco, that was up next. The Spanish Grand Prix, well, to be honest with you, not a lot happened. Once again, Mercedes 1-2. They took the record now of the best start for the season for a team, the most number of consecutive 1-2s at the start of the season. It was Hamilton taking the victory, though Bottas once again taking his 3rd pole position in a row. We saw Magnussen score a 7th place finish, and it would have been a 7-8 for Haas if not for contact between the pair after a late safety car. Grosjean ultimately slipping back down the field, lucky to hold on to 1 point. Monaco, Lewis Hamilton masterclass, pole position, race win. Bottas, it appeared for a very long time, would continue the streak of 1-2 for Mercedes, but contact with Max Verstappen in the pit lane put bay to any hopes of continuing that streak. There was a late charge from Max, a late move coming out of the tunnel on the final few laps, didn't pay off. Hamilton, easy as you like. Hamilton then went on to win further races in Canada and France. Sebastian Vettel getting back-to-back 2nd places in Monaco and Canada. But we all know that Canadian Grand Prix with pole position for the German driver. Should it have been his first win of the season? A controversial escape over the grass on the exit of turn 2. We will never know what would have happened if he didn't get that penalty, but ultimately he was slapped with it, robbed of the victory, many would say, and I would be inclined to agree. But the history books will always say Hamilton won in Canada, Vettel P2, and Charles Leclerc began a really strong streak of podiums in that mid part of the season, his 2nd in Formula 1, 3rd in Canada. The French Grand Prix, well, we don't really need to talk about that, do we? Another 1-2 for Mercedes, and that's about it for the entire race. It wasn't a good one. And by the time we headed to Austria, realistically, we'd had one great race all season long, and it was looking at this stage like it was going to be comfortably a Mercedes 1-2 in the driver's standings, comfortably a constructor's title, and at this point of the season, only Mercedes had won Grand Prix. But we show up to Austria. Pole position for Charles Leclerc, his 2nd of the season, and with Max Verstappen not far behind, it appeared to be Leclerc's day to get that Grand Prix victory. Mercedes, Bottas on the pace, Hamilton an off weekend, Lewis his first race of the season off the podium, and though Bottas was able to claim a 3rd place, it all came down to that fight between the 2 youngsters. At the time, all the stories, the changing of the guard, and so it would seem. Verstappen and Leclerc masterclass at the front of the field. A fantastic fight between the pair of them, and it wouldn't be the last fight between them that we'd see over the course of the season. Leclerc seemed to have the edge overall. But Verstappen, when push came to shove at the end of the Grand Prix, got those elbows out. Slight bit of contact between the two. Again, like 2 races ago in Canada, questions whether there would be a penalty or not for Verstappen. Ultimately, no penalty for the move at the top of the hill, turn 2 or 3, whatever you want to call it. Verstappen, his first win of the season. Leclerc would have to settle for a 2nd place, but his best ever result in Formula 1. We then headed to Silverstone, and once again, we went back to the 1-2s for Mercedes. However, let's not forget what a cracking Grand Prix Silverstone was. It was certainly helped out with Max Verstappen and Sebastian Vettel making contact late on in the Grand Prix. Vettel, not expecting Verstappen to brake so early, completely missed his own braking point into the back of the 007 James Bond branded Red Bull car. But the whole weekend, Bottas got a pole position, a rare pole position at the British Grand Prix, and held his own at the front of the race. A great scrap between Hamilton and Bottas through Luffield, through Woodcote, Wellington Straight. Bottas losing out to Hamilton, but Bottas taking the position back through Copse. Disgustingly good. And I cannot begin to talk about the incredible fight all race long between Verstappen and Leclerc. One of the best wheel-to-wheel battles between 2 drivers for the entire year long. It was also the first weekend where Pierre Gasly seemed to really get his act together for Red Bull. Ahead of Verstappen at certain points of the Grand Prix, fighting with Verstappen at certain points at the Grand Prix, also getting in the mix with the 2 Ferraris, and after contact between Vettel and Verstappen, finished an impressive 4th place, but still missing that podium that he desperately needed over the course of the season. After Silverstone, we headed to Germany. I don't really need to say a lot about Germany, because I think just saying it was Germany is probably enough justice. What a crazy Grand Prix. What a mad Grand Prix. Every lap that we went, there seemed to be another crash, another incident, another driver spinning. Wet Grand Prix, the first wet Grand Prix for years in Formula 1. Started behind safety car, and for the first time in Formula 1 history, we then went to the grid despite the fact we'd already done a few laps in the race already behind the safety car. Early on, it was Raikkonen and Grosjean from the midfield making up positions, and though the Mercedes pair of Hamilton and Bottas off the start looked particularly strong, Verstappen, we know how quick he is in the wet. Vettel and Leclerc, who'd had issues in qualifying, Leclerc and Vettel both having engine issues, working their way up through the field. Sebastian started all the way at the back of the grid and was slowly working his way through, but the rain just got heavier and heavier. Leclerc in the wall, Hülkenberg in the wall, Hamilton in the wall, Sainz off in the wall, and that was all at the same corner. The final 2 corners of the race. Perez in the wall, Norris and Ricciardo with engine issues, contact between the 2 Haas cars. Everything was going on in Germany. And when things started to heat up, it was Max Verstappen with almost a faultless drive. A little spin through the final sector halfway through the Grand Prix was the only blemish in that race for him. An easy victory for the Dutchman. It would be Sebastian Vettel from the back of the grid to P2, his strongest drive comfortably of the season, proving he still got it in Formula 1. And it would be Dani Kvyat, the Russian for Toro Rosso, their 2nd ever podium in Formula 1 history, the Russian's 3rd ever podium in Formula 1 history, proving he also is a man that still has some talent when he needs it. Lance Stroll finished 4th in the Grand Prix, and despite crashing, Carlos Sainz finished 5th. Hamilton almost ended his incredible point streak record, finishing 9th, but perhaps the most important points finishing position was 10th, Robert Kubica, the first and only point for Williams all season long. We headed to Hungary, one final race before the summer break, a scrap between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, who finally claimed his first ever pole position in Formula 1, and so close it was to that Grand Slam. Pole position, fastest lap, but Lewis Hamilton just pipped the Dutchman with 4 laps to go, claiming victory after an incredible strategy call from Mercedes. Bottas, who also needed a great weekend to keep up momentum, keep up the championship hunt. Contact in the first corner had it all to do from lap 1, and in Hungary, a circuit notorious for difficult overtaking, could only claw back to 8th place, his worst finish when finishing over the entire season. And then we had the summer break. There were stories, of course, and plenty of rumours coming for the 2020 season. Would there be driver switches at Mercedes? Would Bottas be able to really take the fight to Hamilton? What was going to happen at Haas? Had Ricciardo's move to Renault really worked out? But before we headed to Belgium, there was the big news that Pierre Gasly would be dropped from Red Bull, and it would be rookie Alexander Albon moving up to the big team. Now, Pierre Gasly's first half of the season had a lot to be desired. The first race of the year in Australia, out in Q1 in a Red Bull. And yeah, you can say to yourself, well, that's not the best, but surely he can work his way back up to points. Sadly not. A P11 on debut for Red Bull really was a lot to be desired. Second race of the season, out in Q2, could only recover to 8th place, and though he got fastest lap in China, it was only a 6th place finish overall. Retired from the Azerbaijan Grand Prix through no fault of his own, an engine failure from Honda, a 6th place in Spain, a 5th place finish in Monaco is all fine, but it's nothing to really get excited about. And when you consider that drivers like Leclerc retired from Monaco, 6th place or 5th place really is the minimum asked for. 8th in Canada, 10th in France, got a penalty in Monaco qualifying for blocking Romain Grosjean in Q2, completely asleep at the wheel. Lots of mistakes under a intense spotlight at one of the top 3 teams. I think Red Bull finally realised that they potentially need to make a change at the Austrian Grand Prix. Verstappen, of course, going on to win that weekend. Pierre Gasly finished 7th, but a lap down on his teammate, and despite a great drive in Britain, made contact with Alex Albon in Germany, retiring from the Grand Prix very late on. Also crashed in practice of that weekend. Hungary wasn't a particular strong weekend, despite the fact that that Red Bull car was capable of winning, and ultimately Albon, who still had a lot to prove in Formula 1, but had shown enough to warrant a chance at Red Bull, and my goodness did he take it in that opening round, starting from the back of the grid with an engine penalty, and with Max Verstappen retiring on the opening lap of the Grand Prix. Albon treated us to a overtaking masterclass. I will say it now, that move on Daniel Ricciardo through the corner with no name, that's its actual name, is one of the best I've seen for a very long time. It didn't even get top 10 in overtakes of the year. Absolutely robbed Alex Albon. But that wasn't his only move on the overtakes of the year, not only in the second half of the season, but in that race. Overtook Sergio Perez with a few laps to go on the grass up the Kemmel Straight. Though his pace wasn't quite on the level of Verstappen, he proved he had guts. He proved he was ready to try and push this thing. He wanted to prove that he can be a man at the top. And though that podium never came in the second half of the year, certainly proved he's a feisty one, and he is going to try his utmost to rectify that podiumless streak in 2020. But we'll go back to the fight at the front. It was Charles Leclerc. A traumatic and horrific weekend for almost everyone involved in Formula 1, but especially Charles. What a drive. What a mature drive. Pole position, race win. Couldn't have happened not only to a nicer guy, but on a weekend that felt so heavy What a right thing that Leclerc finally got his first win in Formula 1. It was a second for Lewis Hamilton and a third for Valtteri Bottas. We headed to Monza. Leclerc off his first win in his Formula 1 career, but still felt he needed to prove himself yet again. And where better place to do it than in front of the Tifosi, the Italian Grand Prix, the most passionate fans in the world. The Orange Army, don't worry guys, you're getting there. But he did it again. Back-to-back race victories. A much harder fight this time round, with Lewis Hamilton chasing him for the entirety of the Grand Prix. The pressure would have been so much. And after the joke that was the Italian Grand Prix Q3 qualifying, where nobody set a flying lap at the end of the session, hopefully I've got some images on screen that does it any kind of justice. Leclerc, what a drive it was come race day. A late charge from Bottas after team orders swapped the two Mercedes cars around also was unable to prevail. That was a real emotional moment with Leclerc up in front of the sea of Italian Ferrari fans. Vettel, well, there were already questions on who was the real number one at Ferrari. Once again, the Spinella came out. Not even 10 laps into the Grand Prix, spinning at Ascari on his own accord, coming back onto the circuit, clipping Lance Stroll, who also did the same thing when he came back on the circuit, pushing Pierre Gasly into the gravel. But Sebastian Vettel coming back onto the circuit like an idiot, in the words of Lance Stroll, and with his teammate winning in Italy for Ferrari, something Seb was unable to do. He was now over a whole year without a victory. Lots of questions and lots of pressure mounting on the German. So we head to Singapore. Ferrari, 2 pole positions in a row. They do it once again. Leclerc on fire in the night of Singapore. But when we got to race day, Vettel, with a trick up his sleeve and a nifty bit of strategy, getting his first win of the season. But it was comfortable for Ferrari. It was finally looking like they could just claw this back to Mercedes. Perhaps that opening streak of 5-1-2s at the beginning of the year was a little too much for Ferrari to claw back. But if they can continue this performance in qualifying and in the race, and with Mercedes failing to get on the podium at all in Singapore, with Max Verstappen claiming 3rd place, maybe, just maybe, a title hunt could be on. And then we headed to Russia. Once again, Ferrari 1-2. Once again, Leclerc on pole, his 4th in a row. Slingshotted Sebastian Vettel into the lead on lap 1, and by now McLaren had comfortably positioned themselves as best of the rest in the midfield. But by the time we got to turn 2, not only were the 2 Ferraris at the front, but the McLarens were sitting up in those podium positions as well, really scrapping it out with the 2 Mercedes cars. Red Bull a little bit further behind. Though McLaren's pace dropped up through the Grand Prix, and though Ferrari clearly had the best car that weekend, team orders boiled over. Leclerc wanted to get back past after slingshotting Vettel into turn 1. Vettel felt that if Leclerc had done that or not, he still would have been leading. Ultimately, squabbling between the two meant that Lewis Hamilton ended up positioning himself between the two. And to make things worse, Vettel, who was leading, retired with an engine failure. Bottas also was able to get past Leclerc with poor strategy from Ferrari on a day that should have been a Mercedes 3-4 or maybe even 5-6, ended up being a 1-2 with Ferrari 3rd and DNFing from the Grand Prix. Japan up next. A typhoon meant qualifying and the race would both take place on Sunday. And you guessed it, Ferrari once again taking pole position, this time Vettel ruining Leclerc's streak, Vettel taking only his 2nd and final pole position of the year. Once again though, a similar story, Ferrari could not hold on to that victory. Leclerc and Verstappen making contact on the opening lap, Albon and Norris making contact also in the opening stages of the Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton and Bottas ended up really taking the fight to Vettel. And with Hamilton and Bottas' superior car and strategy, it was Valtteri who claimed his third win of the season. And though Vettel was able to hold off a late charge from Hamilton, Hamilton did step up on that podium in P3. We also saw a bizarre incident where both Renault cars were disqualified after the Grand Prix with a fuel irregularity, and what would have been a double points finish for the team ended up with none whatsoever, and rivals Danny Kvyat and also Lance Stroll benefiting and jumping into the points as a result. Mexico. A champion could be crowned. Could we see Lewis Hamilton take title number 6? Well, a pole position for Max Verstappen seems also eminent, but Leclerc nicked it with Vettel locking out the front row. Bottas had a mighty crash in qualifying, but in the race recovered all the way back to third place, and with Lewis Hamilton winning, it was not enough to seal that 6th world title. However, he wouldn't have to wait long. Next up, the US Grand Prix, and though pole position and the win was the best Bottas could do to cling on to those very, very narrow title hopes, second for Lewis Hamilton at one of his favourite circuits and favourite places in the world, claimed his 6th world title. Verstappen on the podium tried his best to take the fight to the two Mercs, but their consistency over the season for the German outfit was just unparalleled. Easy pickings for Hamilton and Bottas. The final 2 rounds of the season, with not much to play for up front, was pretty much a free scrap for anyone, and Verstappen, with a win and a pole position in Brazil, made his intentions clear that he wanted 3rd overall. Ferrari in Brazil making contact, Leclerc and Vettel with 10 laps to go out of the Grand Prix. Bottas also retiring, and with Hamilton making contact with Alex Albon, receiving a penalty and down to 7th, joining Verstappen on the podium, not only was Pierre Gasly, who was demoted back to Toro Rosso at the halfway point, but Carlos Sainz for McLaren, their first since 2014. What a crazy final few laps it was in Brazil. And then we rounded off the season in Abu Dhabi. A circuit not best known for crazy racing, but always a lovely backdrop to end the season. A grand slam for Lewis Hamilton, fastest lap, pole position and race win. And it was those 2 youngsters, Verstappen and Leclerc, joining him up on the podium. Leclerc rounding off his first season with Ferrari with 10 podiums, the same as Romain Grosjean, I would like to add. But Hamilton, with 413 points, comfortably world champion. Bottas 2nd, Verstappen 3rd. Leclerc, Vettel rounded up the top 5, but it was Carlos Sainz beating both the Toro Rosso / Red Bull drivers of Gasly and Alex Albon to a 6th place finish and best of the rest in the standings. George Russell, the only driver not to score in 2019, however, with a qualifying record of 21-0 over teammate Robert Kubica, he was indeed the king of qualifying, and keep an eye out for him in the 2020 season, where fingers crossed Williams have a bit of a quicker car. And that is your quick-ish, I say ish, I didn't want it to go on this long, but I think that's about as quick as I can go to fit in every little major detail in the season. But I'm sure I have missed plenty of it. So if you've got a favourite moment I've missed out, I would love to hear it in the comment section below, and I'll pin my favourites and drop a few hearts on some of my favourites. No mentioning Grosjean in the pit lane in Silverstone. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. But I hope you've enjoyed. If you are new around here, feel free to subscribe. Here on out is 2020 content. 2 weeks to go. I'm ready. Are you ready? Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.